Hello and welcome back to yet another video. This week, as I'm sure you can probably tell from my hair and makeup, I am starting my first big costume project of the year, and that is the White Queen from Alice in Wonderland. So I will be breaking this costume up into several parts, the first of which is going to be the chemise and corset. So without any further ado, here is how I made the chemise and corset for the White Queen from Alice in Wonderland. For each of the pieces in this project, I'll be using Simplicity 8579. First of all, I'm starting with the corset. The corset is made up of several layers of fabric, the first of which, the outside layer or the fashion fabric, I'm using this Peter Rabbit cotton. This lightweight striped cotton for the lining. Then for the inner strength layers, I'm using this duck cotton or canvas. Now the pattern says to use zip ties as the boning, but I have an abundance of plastic boning, so I thought it would just be silly if I didn't use that. And finally I have some light blue bias tape and a whole packet of eyelets. So let's get started. As with any project, the first thing that I do is cut out all of the pattern pieces. First from the fashion fabric. Then 2 layers of the duck cotton. And finally, the lining fabric. With all of the pieces now cut out, it is now time to add 2 of the duck cotton pieces to the back of each of the cotton pieces. Once they're perfectly aligned, I then machine baste them together. Alright, now that all the interlining is connected to the top part of the fabrics, the fashion layers if you will, sorry, my mind completely blanked there, I just wanted to talk a bit about the front panel before I go into actually assembling everything. So, this is the front panel of the corset, and as you can see here, there is no seam in that centre, it was cut on the fold. The pattern doesn't call for that, however, because this is the top layer, I didn't want to have to bother with seam matching, which is matching the 2 pieces of fabric to get that exact join there. And it serves no purpose, it is a straight line, so I can get away with cutting it on the fold. However, the interlining pieces I have cut as the pattern calls for, which is to be sewn with the seam there. So before I baste the interlining pieces to the outer layer, I have to sew the seam down here and then iron it flat, and then it can get basted because they will be the same size. So I'm going to do that first, and when you see me next, all of the pieces will be interlined. With all of the interlining done, it was now time to move on to transferring all of the markings for the boning channels. I did this using a heat erasable pen and a straight edge. And just a fair warning, this takes forever. When all of the markings were finished, it was time to work on the back pieces. So what I'm doing here is folding them along that line there and then stitching them down in place. After sewing in the boning channels on either side, it's time to insert the eyelets. To do this, I make the initial hole using an awl. And then to widen it, because I don't have the proper tools for this, I just stab my scissors through it and widen it that way. Then it's eyelet time. So I put the washer side on the back and the other one through the front, and then using the tools provided, I hammer it down in place. Then I repeat the step a bunch more times. Now I can sew all of the boning channels into the rest of the pieces, which is another step that takes forever to do, but also not the last step that takes forever to do. Now it's on to assembly, so here I'm joining the side pieces to the front. And this is your reminder that any seams you see me sewing up here, I am also doing simultaneously with the lining fabric. Next to the side back pieces, to the sides. And finally, the back pieces to the side backs. With all of the pieces joined together, it's now time for boning. Now what you see me doing here is actually cutting the plastic boning to the mock-up that I made. The mock-up ended up being a perfect fit, so I just reused the boning that I did for this in my actual corset. Though it did mean I had to unpick every single bit that I'd sewn on. Before inserting the bones into the channels, I first rounded off all of the edges using a pair of scissors. And then to smooth the edges even further, I used fire. Finally, it was time to insert the bones into the channels. With all of the bones in, it is now time to add the lining layer, and then baste the two layers of the corset together. Hello, so as you can see here, I'm doing a little test fit of it. Unfortunately, nobody is home with me, so I wasn't able to lace it properly. As you can see in the back there, I'm missing some sections, but please, I had to do it myself, forgive me. Anyway, this is just so that you guys can sort of see how the fit is coming along, and oh my god, I love it. I cannot wait until somebody's home so they can put me in this properly, but it looks gorgeous. I'm so happy. Anyway, now onto the bias binding. First, I pin the bias to the right side of the corset and carefully machine stitch it in place. Then I fold it over to the lining side and finally begin the last grueling task in this corset, which is hand stitching the bias tape to the lining. All that's left to do now is to pick out some nice ribbon and lace up the back of the corset, and it is done. On to the chemise, or the stuff that you wear underneath the corset to protect your skin. For this, I'm using a lightweight muslin. Once again, cutting out all of the pattern pieces first. So the first thing to do here are to sew these side pieces to the front and back pieces. And all of the seams in this garment are sewn using French seam. So first I sew a 5mm seam allowance with the wrong sides of the fabric together, and then I fold it over, iron that seam nice and flat, and then sew the same seam again, this time with a 1cm seam allowance. Next I sew the front and back pieces together at the sides and shoulder seams. So this pattern is incredibly quick. It has taken me next to no time to get it all together. At the moment, I just have the sleeves left to put on it. I think I've only worked on this for 15 minutes so far, and in that time I was able to take a break and send a streamer that I'm watching on Twitch a really cursed edited fit photo of him, and here, have a look. See, there it is there. But it's really hot in here and I needed to turn my iron off, so I'll see you guys tomorrow for that one. On the start of the next day, I decided to make the sleeves. And the first step is to add the gusset. First, I sew down this line, then fold it over and sew it down this line. And then I fold it over again, sewing up the underarm seam. And can you spot what I've done wrong here yet? Because I certainly hadn't. Alright, so we're just going to ignore the fact that the sleeve that I just showed you how to make was actually made wrong, and I mean it has nothing to do with the instructions maybe not being very clear on which dots line up with which, and this is how it's meant to look. So when you fold it in half and you're sewing up the inside seam of the arm, the point should be pointing upward, not downward as I had it on the other one, which I would show you, but I got so frustrated and I tried to unpick it that I ended up ripping it, so that was really cool. But yeah, so guide marks for the armhole up the top, nice flat edge there, and then you've got the diagonal coming in towards the underarm seam. So yeah, just make sure you do it that way and not how I showed you when I first put it together. Cool, let's go. With the gusset sewn in the right way this time, it was now time to sew the sleeve onto the chemise. Oh, sorry, I had too much chili with my lunch and it's catching in my throat. Anyway, hello! Sleeves are on! Woo! That was a mission and a half. Now all that's left to do on this chemise is to finish all of the raw edges, which are the neckline, the sleeves, and the bottom of the dress. Now the instructions say to hand sew all of it, but I ain't got time for that. So you know what I'm going to do instead? I have access to an overlocker that can do rolled hem edges, which is exactly what I'm going to do, and therefore I just need to run it straight through the overlocker, and then the edges are nice and finished. I don't care about hand stitching them down, because this is an underlayer and it's not going to be seen, so none of the edges will be seen. Therefore, it doesn't matter, does it? Let's get to the overlocker. After doing a rolled hem on the neckline, the sleeves, and the hem of the dress, the chemise is now done, which means all of the under things are done. And there you have it. That is how I made the chemise and corset for the White Queen from Alice in Wonderland. I am so happy with this corset. It fits me so well, and the shape it is giving is so incredible. Definitely recommend for this. And it's completely comfortable too, which is a bonus. The chemise, a little bit more see-through than I expected, but that's cool. The sleeves currently are a bit too long. I'll probably trim them back so that they get hidden under the tiny little bubble sleeve that she has around her bicep. But other than that, comfortable, protecting my skin from direct contact with the corset, which is all you basically want from a chemise. And obviously I couldn't resist doing a little trial of the makeup with the wig, and just to see, you know, how it's going to look when the costume is eventually done. I'm so happy with it. It's looking really cool. Next week's video, I am going to be tackling the shape of the skirts. So I'm undecided currently whether or not I'm going to do that using a bum pad or panniers or a hoop skirt, some form of petticoat, but you guys will see that in next week's video. So make sure you subscribe, like this video, leave a comment down below. I do a lot of sewing, crafting and fun related things here on this channel. And with all that being said, I'll see you guys next week. Goodbye! So before I attach the interlining, before I base... I can breathe.